Politics and America's battle, the battle for the economic soul of America. It's actually not as complicated when I really think about it as I thought. I want to describe it to you, define it to you, so that we have a better framework to talk about this. So instead of shouting over each other or at each other, we'll think about how maybe we could come to a conclusion. Um, that's going to piss everybody off a little bit and please a lot of people a little bit. So that's what we're going to talk about. Buckle up. And if you have any questions, comments, hit me up in the comments. I love hearing from you. And if you're watching this in the replay or the live stream, I will see your comments. And if you don't mind, give me a thumbs up. It helps spread the good word about the work we're doing here. This is calling balls and strikes in an unbiased way and giving it to you straight, the things that you won't hear about. I have no agenda to push on you. All right. So you're getting a good opinion. I'm a financial advisor for 35 years and I've seen a lot. I know a lot. And I just spill it all and share it all with you. Mistakes, lessons, challenges, how clients have overcome financial challenges. And if you're watching on YouTube, please consider subscribing. If you're watching on our Facebook page, please consider following or liking our page. And if you're watching on LinkedIn, I'd be happy to connect with you. All right, here goes. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today. A couple of things to talk about. All right. We could talk more about the market, the economy, and the tariffs. Today was a little bit of a reprieve. I would say a mild, so-so bounce in the S&P and NASDAQ. By the way, you cannot invest directly into an index, but you can invest into a security that tracks or mimics an index. I have to say that every time I talk about the S&P 500 or NASDAQ or Dow, whatever, any index. JP Morgan from here cuts the price target of Tesla in half. Not in half from like when it was, 400 and change. From now, they have a target of 120, which is still a far drop from here. But the stock was the leading gainer in the S&P 500 percentage-wise today. So a bit of a bounce. I am not I'm not of the mindset that stocks just bounce back or we come to some agreement on tariffs and they bounce back. In the first Trump administration, there were talks of tariffs, gold standard, all kinds of things that your conventional wisdom, commonplace thinking is that these are all terrible and they all caused a lot of havoc. I do think those are terrible, by the way. I'm in that camp. But once the tariffs were in place, they were a lot milder than, and a lot more targeted than they were originally proposed. The bluster was out there, but the policy was not as blustery. And then the market started to wind its way up until the pandemic. Had it not been for the pandemic, I do think it would have been a very strong market and a pretty good economy. And, but it is what it is, and we can't. we are observers of history. We're not looking to say, I wish it was this, I wish it was that. So let's talk about the divide, Republicans, economics, and we'll talk about things that just other people are not willing to address because, never talk religion and politics. But I think politics is important, and the intersection of politics and money and Wall Street and Main Street, these are really important things. I'm going to do my best to sum up the two sides, and I know when this is over today, tomorrow I'm going to think, I could have said this, I could have said that. So maybe I'll have to adjust this. But let's start with the market. We had a massive market upturn since the bottom of 2020 during the pandemic, in the early stage of the pandemic. And there was massive stimulus and government spending. By the Trump administration, followed by the Biden administration. Okay. So lots and lots of spending, but the amount of spending, free money, helicopter money, that ended. And in that regard, we've been running on fumes. And every time we talk about the economy doing better, the stimulus wears off and we have to do like another stimulus. Like, when is the economy going to be strong enough to just act on its own without a major governmental intervention to keep it going? Now, the Biden economy was pretty good. It was pretty good. The market did well, but in the last year, the taxes that the government took in, that's how the government gets money to spend, was $4.9 trillion. But the government spent 6.9 trillion. So it's a massive $2 trillion deficit. And that is the biggest it's ever been. We can't pile on another $2 trillion of debt every year. And the thing is, if you try to scale back that amount of debt, it basically equals a spending cut and slower economic growth and pain. People like getting money for things. People like companies like it when there's more spending for their products, government spending, for example. So that's where we are. And you could define government spending, I guess, from the Democrat way, and the Republican way is there's no such thing as government spending. There's only taxes that get spent. Okay, it's tax, not government funded. It's taxpayer funded because the government is funded by taxes. Now you know that. So when the government gives you a credit to buy an EV, who's paying for that? You are. We are. Because don't forget, when the government takes in money and then gives it out as stimulus to people, the government could say, well, we're giving the people back their own money. It's the people's money. For example, the DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, Musk proposed that if we save a lot of money, why don't we give each taxpayer in the country, everyone who files a tax return, give them $5,000, or at least everybody pays taxes. There are plenty of people who file a tax return who don't pay taxes, but because it's the people's money. But then again, I'm saying, but the debt is the people's debt too. So shouldn't we pay down the debt? And then you have U.S. aid. Well, with $36 trillion in debt and growing, should we really be giving money out? Should we be doing that? All right. And then we have the Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and defense spending, which is something like 89 to 90% of the government spending. So even if you cut other programs, it's really a minuscule amount. Not to say that we should be efficient. And I'm putting it in both sides here that, so how do you take, if we're spending 6.9 trillion a year and only taking in 4.9 trillion a year in taxes, how do we fix that? Well, one side is saying, let's cut spending on Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. Let's fix those. Let's fix them, make them more viable so that they could last for the long term. But all the states are used to spending that money because states get blocks, of money from the government to spend on Medicaid, Medicare, that sort of thing. You can't just get rid of it. Okay. Well, what about cutting defense spending? Do we live in a world where we should really be cutting back on defense? Plus, defense is a huge industry for our country. Like we export a ton of defense products, including F-35s, howitzers, all kinds of missiles. We have a pretty big export market, so that's a big business. Defense spending. Where do we cut back? But if we cut back and we lower the debt, lower the budget deficit and the national debt. So the budget deficit is how much more we spend per year above and beyond what we take in for taxes. And then that deficit gets added to the national debt, which is now about $36 trillion. And it's doubled in like the last, I guess in the last 8 to 10 years, it's doubled. So where's it going to go? And I just don't think you could grow the economy quick enough to get rid of that debt or to make that debt a smaller portion of our annual GDP. Maybe we could. I don't think we can. I've heard the term trickle down economics. You've heard it. I've often thought of the term trickle down economics as rich people peeing on poor people. I've heard it that way. But it's proven. Tax cuts help, but they're not a panacea for everything that ills an economy. So what do you do? Well, we could cut back Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, defense spending. You cut those four things, I mean, you're really going to bring down spending. Or you could raise taxes. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires at the end of this year, at the end of 2025, and tax brackets go back up. Tax rates go up to where they were in 2016, 2015. They go up. That's what you need to know. They go higher. And that would bring in trillions of dollars of revenue. And then we maybe don't have to cut spending for anything. But one way or the other, something has to give. And from my economist brain, it's got to be, in my opinion, maybe a couple of levers: free spending in certain areas, if not cutting, and letting taxes go up, maybe for people who make over $1 million in income a year, maybe over $2 million, maybe 400,000. The Biden Kamala Harris proposal was, let the tax cuts expire for anyone making over 400,000 a year. So maybe we make that 500,000 or 600,000 or $1 million a year. But somehow, somewhere, there's going to have to be some kind of compromise. The Trump proposals, the Republican proposals, okay, including keeping the tax cuts in force, making those permanent, is going to raise the deficit by a hell of a lot. So who's going to win this war? And it's just a point of view that, do you cut spending or do you raise taxes on high income earners? Someone has to pay for the country. And that's I don't think I'm telling you anything you don't know. But if I had my way, we would look at all of those, and they would all be a part of it. I would probably do a lot less cutting and more revenue raising. It's going to be really hard for Elon Musk, to find $1 trillion to cut. By all estimates I've seen, the cuts that are being made because of Doge are going to add up to a drop in the bucket and a lot of bluster. And there's a price to be paid for these cuts. Now, I know technology and artificial intelligence could help government agencies become more efficient, but that takes a long time. And then there's tariffs. And tariffs could encourage more domestic production, but it takes a long time to shift domestic production to the United States, to reshore manufacturing, production, distribution. This takes time. As a free market society, corporations have been looking to create, develop, manufacture in whatever locales are the most efficient for them. So by bringing that here, it's not because it's more efficient by doing this in the United States. It's just that there was an imposition put on called a tariff. So that a tariff is an artificial, arbitrary number, penalty. It's arbitrary. It's man-made. It's not money. It's not the cost of capital going to where it's the cheapest if it's manipulated by something like a tariff. Now, I'm all for fair trade, but I don't think tariffs are the way to go. And if we want to put tariffs on things, uh, it'll raise prices for sure. And don't think for a second that domestic producers won't look at that as an opportunity to raise their own prices to take advantage of the situation. Uh, so that basically is the battle. And then you look at the social causes. People who pay taxes say, many say, I'm paying taxes, but I don't want my tax money going to Ukraine or going to Africa. I want my tax money to be spent here where we need it. And then others will say, being part of the free world, propping up democracies is important to us. I mean, we look at Israel as the only democracy in the Middle East and how important it is to prop that country up. I'm pro-Israel, but doesn't that count for Ukraine too? But that's the battle that people are fighting. And whichever political party is in power will have, winning has consequences, losing has consequences. So whatever political party is in place will have a bigger pull toward their collective point of view. And when we have these changes, which used to take decades long and were very long trends, these changes now could take place every 4 to 8 years, depending on elections. And this is very difficult to go through, and it's going to have an impact on the economy, and especially on your ability to reach your financial goals. Because, a rocky market makes it tough to plan. When we run financial plans, we look at people's assets, the value of their, brokerage accounts and retirement plans. You give them a view of, we think if you grow the funds at 7% annually with an inflation rate of 3% annually, and you're growing your contributions to these portfolios a certain amount, and based on what your house could be a certain amount, 20 years, what your net worth could be, and then we turn it into spending for 25 years after that, throw in an inflation rate for healthcare, because that's typically higher than the national inflation rate, which is CPI. And we say, based on all these assumptions, this is when you could run out of money. It's just, will you be 90 or 95 or 100? These are the things. And we'll tell people, if you run out of money, till 85 also. And when we have gyrations in interest rates and inflation, it makes the planning much harder. And when the planning is harder, it's more uncertain and the results become less reliable 20 years from down the road. Consumers stop planning, or they plan for the worst and they stop spending. Businesses put off projects. It changes travel. Delta, American Air, United, they're all coming out and saying they see a downtrend in air travel. Boeing said that their aircraft are going to cost millions of dollars more, because of tariffs. So all of these things are intertwined. I keep seeing lists all over financial news sites. 10 stocks that to ride out the tough market with. 5 stocks that should get around or won't be impacted. That won't be impacted by tariffs. 8 stocks that could you know, 8 stocks that could benefit from, you know, whatever from high tariffs. And I look at these stocks and they're all down just like all the other stocks. I'm like, what is so good about these stocks? But they get eyeballs. So this is making this is making investing a lot tougher. And I understand the inflation figures today. I know they came in a little bit lighter than expected. Unemployment rate went up one tick from 4% to 4.1%. Not as many jobs are created from the last employment report last week. I don't think anybody expected a problem with these reports. I think the problem is that they're expected to be impacted in the next couple of months. That's when we should start to see in the statistics more evidence of a downturn. But if we're expecting a downturn and we act like we're going to a downturn, it makes us hunker down, cut spending, fewer dinners out, less money spent on new plants and equipment. For consumers, less money maybe spent on dinners or, furniture, whatever we do to cut out things that we don't need to cut out. All right, we cut things out that we don't need. That alone creates an economic slowdown. Now, if the economy stays flat and doesn't go backwards or only grows a tiny bit, that's a growth recession. A recession is if the economy actually shrinks. Like you don't just say, the economy year over year grew by 0 or 0.2%, but if it actually shrunk, now we're talking recession. Both of those scenarios are going to feel pretty bad because when you don't get growth in a business, then how do you grow the earnings? If you can't grow sales and sales are flat and you have earnings, what are you going to do to improve those earnings? You got to find expenses to cut. The biggest expense of a business is typically its labor. So businesses are eager to find ways to cut labor. So anyway, it's a scarcity mentality that has overtaken politics. And it's not a matter of the economy creating enough wealth for everyone. It's really hard to grow the economy. Now, I started by saying the Biden economy was pretty good, especially, in the last year was pretty good. But if you have to spend $2 trillion to have a good economy, is it really a good economy if it's not sustainable, which in my opinion, that is not sustainable? That's the conundrum we're in. And that's why every now and then you get a professional or someone famous like Ray Dalio from Bridgewater will say, we are going to have hell to pay for all the debt that we've issued as a country. And now Europe, Germany especially, is raising their debt ceiling, and Japan is borrowing like crazy. It doesn't really matter until you see interest rates go up. But I could tell you the United States on the interest on our debt, because we borrow money in the form of treasury bonds, the interest on all the treasury bonds last year was a little bit more than what we spent on defense. So, that's becoming the biggest expense of the United States. It's interest. So where do we knock that down? Do we raise taxes? That would help. But if you raise taxes and don't get your spending under control, that's not going to help because you can't perpetually raise taxes. It's something you could get away with for a brief amount of time until that's not even enough. You can cut spending for only so long, but because of inflation, eventually that can only go on so long because you have to raise prices. It's quite a conundrum that we're in. And the political solution, can't be my way or the highway. But in a world of hard left and hard right, that's what we get, especially in primaries, because, middle of the road people can't win a primary. All right. You really have to galvanize people hardcore to win a primary. And then you have elections with either hard left or hard right, hard cutting or hard raising taxes, hardcore cutting spending or hardcore raising taxes. And then you get one or the other. So now it's just a matter of who can have, 51% of the House of Republicans. It's a real conundrum. And I don't really know if we could get around it anytime soon until we have to. But by the time we have to do something about it, it's going to be because we've run into the reality of markets, borrowing capacity, and inflation, and it's going to be a really uncomfortable time to make a hard choice, and it won't be in our control. We all know the best time to make a decision for the future is when things are in your control. Because if you don't, then the future will make its decision for you. All right, so that's basically putting the political divide and the battle for America's economic soul in context. I hope this helps you with how you think of things, and I hope that the next time you have a thought or you hear a politician scream and shout, "This is how it's got to be done. We're only doing this. We're only doing that. We're only cutting spending. We're only going to raise taxes." I hope you hear how bad that sounds, how not only one-sided, but how it's just not a workable solution for an economy with 330 million participants. And there's got to be wiggle room in the middle. And I hope there is someone who can be strong enough to take over that middle. All right. I hope you all have a nice day. I'll be back to you tomorrow, and we'll be back to talking about the stock market getting trashed and all the things that you could do to help yourself. Okay. Thanks.